I do have a question, though, on the overall, as you said, the timeline could be fair, 2 to 3 years. I would agree with you if, in fact, we had a product. And I think that goes back to the case of, on the order form, it's a product order form, when, in fact, there never was a product. And in the industry, we call it vaporware, where you are developing a service. It is a service contract, basically, until you've developed that actual product, because nothing actually existed. Well, if it's not true, Andy, then explain it.
The software was ran against a copy of our existing database, and we were able to. Something I had looked at, sat down with, and ran through a bunch of modules and had them bring up a variety of different types of reports on our data and show different screens. Now, if they were facades, they were very, very good facades. But I did run through the software with them, so there was a functional product. Was it functional to the point that we could use it? Obviously not. Obviously, staff had concerns about it, and I'm glad that they did raise those concerns if it wasn't ready. But there was a product at that point in time when we made that decision that we were able to view and look at data.
Okay. So that product never actually arrived, though. Is that true?
Whether it was installed on our servers or whether it was operating on theirs, I didn't ask that question.
Okay. So I guess I'll go back to my question. In your review, is what we received an actual standalone product, or is this a top layer that goes on top of our existing product?
So I have not had the time to do kind of a deep dive into this yet. I will say just some basic conversations with Gino. I was understanding that this was a development of a new product that was based on an old system, or on the previous system. But outside of that, I can't really say.
Okay.
I don't. What I don't know is if there was a CD or anything else that had actually media on it that you could go and install at the time that any payment was made, or the time they should have delivered that.
Okay. And then the last thing I'll say is you brought up a really great point at the end. To me, it's all about the forensic analysis of how we got here and how we make sure we don't do it again, right? And that means you write airtight contracts. You start with requirements. You work through a statement of work so that if there is scope creep, that you have a mechanism in place to take care of that. Are you going to continue your analysis or your investigation to make sure that you give us an idea of how we can do that?
And Jen, I don't know if you want to comment on specifically. I believe that that there is an audit in the plan, but I'll let you.
Included in our audit plan for 2016 is an audit of the implementation of the system. And since we've had, a lot of conversation about this today, what our preference would be and what we will be bringing to the audit committee that ultimately comes to you is to take from this time forward and waiting for the presentation that's going to follow us to say what is supposed to happen from today going forward, and to have our IT systems kind of walking along the way to be able to say, okay, this is what was supposed to happen. Did it happen from both an IT standpoint and from a payment standpoint? So moving forward and going forward with a very active online real-time monitoring.
Okay, thanks.
Going forward, we should recommend that we have an expert assisting who has experience in these type of projects going forward, be it a consultant, right? Whether it be a consultant who we can contract to do that, or whether it would be more beneficial to hire somebody to do that. And I would look recommendations from RSM as to what typical guidance an organization like us would engage in to make sure these things go a little smoother. And our best interest is looked into. Could you speak to that?
Why don't we still have to hear from Harris, because they're going to be a part of this and what they're going to be bringing to the table. But I don't want to gloss over the fact that mistakes were made, Andy.
That's the point. We want to
right,
avoid them going forward.
Okay, but and I hear what you were saying, but I heard you take, yes, staff did the best they could, but staff also made mistakes. Okay, I just want to make sure we don't
there
separate
were
the two
many
sentences.
mistakes in that, and I think they're due to not having knowledge or expertise in what they were engaging in, not by any ill intent at all.
No, there was no ill intent.
No ill intent, just it was a bigger project, and some expertise would have been very helpful at the beginning. And I'm saying is, let's make sure we have that going forward.
Okay, but yeah, before we start going into what, yes, Mrs. Belford?
I didn't mean to interrupt your sentence.
No, I just said before we start going into other recommendations, I guess I want to get the third part in and what they're doing, because that's the third piece of the puzzle. And so that's why the attorneys are still staying. I know RSM's going to stick around, but going ahead.
Just at some point, I think we need to revisit the discussion of the task of the audit committee moving forward, looking only forward. So if that is more appropriately placed after Harris speaks, I certainly understand that. I just think it should be part of the conversation.
Okay. I guess I would like to bring Harris in for, well, is your concern with them only looking forward, or are you wanting them to look back?
I just feel like really in order to know what we need to do going forward, we have to know what we did wrong in the past. We have to look at the process and where our current policies failed, so that we can make sure that we are addressing that in completeness.
Okay, I guess I felt like we had that from the attorney's report. Do you not feel like we had that from the attorney's report?
My only concern is if you look at both the reports of McGladrey and of the attorneys, both have stated the fact that this was quick turnaround and that they really only did kind of a topical evaluation of what was taking place. And so my concern would be that we make sure that whatever depth we need to look at to ensure that we don't face this again in the future going forward, that we take that opportunity to look at it in depth as opposed to limiting it ourselves to between two board meetings.
Okay, Jennifer? Can you incorporate that into this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Lessons learned, best practices, those kinds of things. We'll incorporate that into our look forward.
Okay, yeah, I don't see
Then Harris is responsible for taking care of that, so it shouldn't be our issue. But licensing is a concern because this company's changed names 5 or 6 times. Much of it wasn't brought to the school board's attention. When the original Crosspoint Inc. was judicially liquidated in 2006, I couldn't find any record that the school board knew that they had been judicially liquidated and their assets purchased by Crosspoint LLC, which was under the control of the husband of the founder of Crosspoint Inc. And we can't find any records to indicate that. So that is something that the board may need to want to follow up on, but I don't think it's critical given the contract between Harris and the school board that Harris is responsible for ensuring licenses are proper.
So how do we get here? I think Mr. Craig actually hit the nail on the head there when he talked about requirements, that there apparently were not a whole lot of requirements. There are a couple different things that we think that were areas for improvement, right? So I think the processes are one of the first things. The processes are not as tight as we probably would run. I know they're not as tight as we would run Harris School Solutions. Our development processes are much tighter than I believe what was in place for Crosspoint. And in fact, we use an agile methodology for our development lifecycle, and so we're going to institute a lot of those processes and procedures into the Crosspoint team. In fact, like I said, the Crosspoint team is now part of Harris. So, I refer to them as Crosspoint, but really they're Harris, and they are all Harris employees. Just so you know, they all came over as Harris employees. And I'll touch upon that in a moment. But really, it comes down to the issues that we look at are the processes, the requirements. As I said, Mr. Craig, I think, hit the nail on the head. The requirements were not very well documented, if at all. Where they were documented, if there was a change, I think there's a lot of verbal commitments made, but without a lot of writing, not a lot of documentation, not any communication to the board and or to the public to let them know what's going on. Those are really some of the key things. And as an example, if I look at the financials just alone, we went back to our development staff and we said, okay, what have we done? What have we added to the product that was not in the original requirements as we understood them? We very quickly came up with 20 plus enhancements that were performed to the product that weren't documented. And aside from the financial implications, it impacts the timeline. This is an enterprise resource planning program. It's actually meant to support an enterprise. It's a very large project with a lot of moving parts. And to have changes that are done that are not documented is quite frankly, a little concerning. So